Hey guys, and welcome to the video on photosynthesis. So let's dive on in. First thing to talk about is where do plants get their mass? So we're talking about how do plants grow, and not only how do they grow, but where do they get the elements and the compounds that they break down in order to grow. And we're going to watch a short video on this real quick. This is a really weird commercial. I don't know why it's like that.
Trees are some of the biggest organisms on the planet. But where do they get that matter to grow?
It's nutrients out of the ground. It's that soil, isn't it? Yeah. Goodness out of the soil, I suppose.
Comes out of the soil.
Goodness.
Why isn't there a big hole around the tree where it's taken out all the soil?
Does it say gradually that the soil has time to recover?
Now, I think it's intuitive to believe that the tree gets most of its mass from the soil, because you can see those roots digging into the soil, and they must be taking something out of there. And I mean, a tree looks like dirt, and it feels solid like dirt, but it's not. In the early 1600s, a scientist named Johann Baptista van Helmont tried to figure out where the mass of a tree was coming from. So he got a pot of soil and very carefully measured the amount of soil in there. Then he planted the tree and took care of it for 5 years, making sure that no soil left or was added to his pot. And at the end of this experiment, he weighed the tree to find that it was 72 kilograms, but the mass of soil had only decreased by about 60 grams. This was pretty strong evidence that the mass of the tree does not come from the soil.
I've never thought about that actually, because they don't really eat anything. Trees.
They don't eat anything?
No.
They don't eat anything.
Water is all they absorb.
That's all they eat.
Yeah.
They don't eat anything else.
No.
That's all they eat.
Well, presumably from the water and the nutrients from the soil.
Is there anything else that you need besides the soil and the water
It's what you need, isn't it?
to make
Other than the original seed for that particular tree.
the seed and the soil and the water, and that makes this big tree? Of course, Johann Baptista van Helmont did conclude that the tree was made entirely of water. Now, while that's not correct, at least he was on the right track, realizing that the matter of a tree doesn't come out of the soil.
The sun, energy, yeah.
The sun energy.
Yeah.
Are they converting energy into mass, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like there wasn't stuff, and then there was. Like, where did that stuff come from?
Magic. I don't know.
My question is, where do they get that mass to grow big?
Sun. It's from the rain and the sun, presumably. Light. Sunlight.
And the sunshine.
The sunshine? Does the sunshine add mass to the tree?
Well, yes, they wouldn't grow without it. I don't know whether it adds mass, but they wouldn't grow without it.
Of course, the sun's energy is needed for the tree to build the matter into its branches and leaves. But the sun itself, the energy, is not matter.
Well, I suppose we've got air in this as well.
Yeah.
So it's got to be something out of the,
What is it about the air?
a gas in the air that it needs as well.
Oxygen.
The trees need the oxygen.
Yeah, the oxygen, don't they?
And I guess oxygen.
The oxygen, of course.
The oxygen. Are there any ingredients that we're missing?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide.
So would it surprise you to find out that 95% of a tree is actually from carbon dioxide? Trees are largely made up of air.
Yeah.
I need this reaction like, oh, holy gosh. So as it turns out, trees are mostly made out of air, out of the carbon dioxide that they take in. What's interesting is that we breathe out carbon dioxide and water. That's how we lose mass. But it's the exact same substances that trees breathe in to gain mass. So if you can imagine a closed system where it was just you and a tree, you would breathe out that carbon dioxide and water, the tree would take it in, so you would get smaller while the tree is getting bigger. And it
Okay, so I really like that video. I think for one, it's just kind of nice just to see adults who don't have all the answers. But especially because they kind of go through their reasoning behind each one of these things. So first of all, soil/dirt, we know that that is where plants get their nutrients from. Their nutrients are things like nitrogen, potassium, things that they need in order to survive for sure, but are not necessarily the same thing. It's like the difference between your vitamins and your food. Yeah, sure, you need vitamins, but a lot of times you get your vitamins from your food. And for plants, they have to just get a little extra from the soil. Rain, water is very important. It's one of the reactants of photosynthesis. You can't do photosynthesis without water. Sunlight, also important, but not quite the same thing as the basis. So as they said, in the air, we have a gas called carbon dioxide. And in that carbon dioxide, this is the composition of air. The air is about 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, which plants do need, actually. And then see how small of a percentage, that little sliver right here, is carbon dioxide gas in the air. Plants get their mass from carbon dioxide. Animals are also carbon-based, and so is actually everything on our planet is a carbon-based living organism. Sorry, if we think about living organisms, then everything that is alive is made up of carbon atoms. The most prevalent element of our element in our atmosphere is actually nitrogen, and it's largely useless in this form. It actually has to be changed into something else first. All right, so what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis. It's the process that autotrophs, so the word autotroph, auto means like yourself, and then troph is going to refer to like the energy level. So an autotroph is something that can make its own food, or it can just do photosynthesis. And that's the process that autotrophs use to convert carbon dioxide and light energy from the sun into chemical energy in the form of glucose, which is used as food. Glucose, by the way, is a type of sugar. If you think about the sugar that you would put like in tea or coffee, you're using sucrose, a more complex sugar. If we think about a few other sugars we might know, like lactose, lactose is the type of sugar from milk, and fructose is the type of sugar from fruit. And so glucose is just a very simple sugar that plants need, and also we need. We use it all the time. Which organisms use photosynthesis? Of course, the big call out is plants, but a lot of people don't know that algae also does photosynthesis, and not just that it does photosynthesis, it does a lot of it. Algae makes almost as much oxygen as the trees on our planet, and yet they don't get any shout outs. And then finally, there's a type of bacteria called cyanobacteria that also uses photosynthesis. There is no animal that can use photosynthesis because we lack an essential component. And then finally, fungi, things like mushrooms and lichens, they don't do photosynthesis. Instead, they absorb nutrients from things that are dying, which isn't the same thing as making your own. Where does photosynthesis occur in the plant? If you chose the answer leaves, you would be correct. However, there's one other place. A lot of plants also do a small amount of photosynthesis in their stem. And how you can tell is the part of the plant that is green allows it to do photosynthesis. So flowers are for reproduction. Roots are to absorb nutrients and to anchor the plant in place. But stems and leaves especially are going to fan out and capture that light. Plants without leaves, something like a cactus maybe. So a cactus, the spikes are kind of the leaves. So because they don't have any leaves, instead their whole body, their whole stem, also conducts photosynthesis and is kind of big and fleshy. And because of that, it is also able to absorb this. So any part of the plant that is green contains the pigment chlorophyll and therefore is able to do photosynthesis. So what is chlorophyll? Chlorophyll is contained in chloroplasts. Here is a picture of these here. You guys are going to learn a lot about the structure and function of chloroplasts next year in biology. So we're just going to look at them a little bit briefly. The chloroplast is an organelle, so like a type of organ, that's really unique to autotrophs, so plants and those algae, and it allows it to conduct photosynthesis. chloroplasts are able to do this because they have the pigment chlorophyll, and that converts solar energy to chemical energy. So chemical energy is kind of two things. First thing is ATP, which we'll look at, and then also that glucose that they're using for sugar. There's different types of pigments. There's chlorophyll A and B. Chlorophyll is the light capturing pigment that's found in chloroplasts. It absorbs light across all wavelengths except for green. It doesn't absorb green wavelengths. We'll talk about that in a second. You might wonder what happens to leaves in the fall, leaves that are not always green, right? So there's other pigments that you can have. One I wanted to sort of spotlight is this one called carotenoid. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Is also able to absorb light for photosynthesis, although it doesn't do it quite as well as chlorophyll. And it reflects red, yellow, and orange light in colors. So whenever leaves turn colors in the fall, they are stopping their production of chlorophyll, and they're sort of revealing those other plant pigments that chlorophyll hid from them. So you might see yellows and oranges and reds, and these are caused by different pigments, different compounds. And we now know that a lot of those compounds give us different flavors, like in fruits and vegetables, and also different benefits. All right, so this is what we've all been waiting for, the photosynthesis equation. On the reactant side, we have carbon dioxide and water. On the product side, we have glucose and oxygen, okay? Notice that solar energy is not on the reactants or the product side. That is because it instead is the activation energy that is used to sort of drive the reaction. So that solar energy is just going to give us that little push over the hill. If we remember back to last unit, then photosynthesis is an endothermic reaction. And because of that, it absorbs energy in order to lock that energy kind of away in a higher energy product. All right, why are we still learning photosynthesis? You guys had this like 4 times, right? Something like that. You learned it as little kids. You learned a little bit about plants in elementary school, and then again in middle school and junior high. And so here we are, once again, learning about plants. We're learning photosynthesis again for a couple reasons. Number one, it produces all of the oxygen and all the glucose on our planet, both of which we would completely die without. It is the basis for life on this planet and for the food chain, both of which we appreciate. And then finally, photosynthesis is actually pretty complicated in terms of what it looks like at a molecular level. And because of that, as you continue on in your science career, we don't have to know this, and actually you won't need to know this for a very, very, very long time if you continue on with science. But just know that it does get progressively a little bit more complicated. Nothing's quite as simple as we assume. So in photosynthesis, this is sort of a summary of what happens. I just want to highlight a couple things. Chlorophyll absorbs like a photon, which is a light particle, sort of. And one of its electrons is sort of excited. And because of that, it transfers molecules to chlorophyll, leaving it with a positive charge. Next, we have water molecules are split. They're used to make something called ATP. It's going to come back around. Hydrogen from the water is combined with carbon dioxide that the plant pulls into its leaf to make carbohydrates. Carbohydrates. So the word carb, carbons, and then hydrates is hydrogen and oxygens together. And then finally, photosynthesis has 2 different stages, the light dependent, where you need light, and the light independent, where light is not necessarily something you have to have. There's different pathways for photosynthesis. Again, this is just extra information. There's one thing I wanted to highlight here, and that is plants that live in different environments have different adaptations to, number 1, collect as much carbon dioxide as possible. And number 2, when they're collecting carbon dioxide by opening up their leaves, the little holes in their leaves called stomata, those plants have to do it fast enough in order to not lose too much water. And while it's pretty easy if you live in most places, it's really, really hard if you live in places like the desert. So for example, there's just different pathways for different plants as it gets harder for them to do photosynthesis in their environment. All right, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. is called energy currency of the cell because it can be spent in order to make chemical reactions occur. The more energy you need for a chemical reaction, the more ATP you have to have. ATP isn't just used by plants, it's used in every single living cell, from the smallest microbe all the way to the blue whale, from plants, mushrooms, us, doesn't matter. If it has a cell, it's using ATP. The energy released during a reaction where you break down stuff like cellular respiration is stored in ATP. And then also the energy that's trapped, like in photosynthesis, is trapped in ATP molecules. You have to sort of spend ATP anytime you want to do something that living things have to do, like gain energy, lose energy, get rid of waste, reproduce, get food, all the important things. All right, so plants are able to use light, and we know that, but what is light? Light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. We'll have a whole unit on that in the springtime, but for now, just know it has what's called a wavelength and a frequency. Light is kind of weird. It acts like both a wave and a particle, which is sort of confusing. That is okay. Light is the visible spectrum that we are able to detect with our eyes. There's more spectrums, and certain animals can actually see in these. So there's ultraviolet or UV light, and then infrared light you might have heard of too. We can see in this very narrow range of 400 to 700 nanometers. And from there we get blue, violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. So a couple of things. Here is a graph that shows chlorophyll and also beta carotene, and it shows how much light they can absorb based upon the wavelength. So as we absorb more light, then we're up higher, less light down here, and then which wavelength. So when talking about visible light, your light can either be reflected or absorbed. If an object has like a certain color, then that is the wavelength it reflects back. If it doesn't have that color, then it is absorbing those colors. So for instance, if we're talking about plants, plants are green most of the time. Because of that, they are unable to absorb green and yellow light. If we go down here, they're not doing a very good job of absorbing it down here. Oh, oops. So instead, they have to absorb over here this graph's a little hard to see, but they're best at absorbing blue light, followed by red light and then violet, or violet and then red. Kind of depends on the species. They're so-so at absorbing orange light, like okay, really bad at yellow, and extra bad at green. And all of the colors that plants absorb, those are the ones that we do not see. So if you go and look up like blue in terms of like flowers or fruit, you'll notice there's not really very many of them. And even the things we think of as being kind of classic blue colors, like blueberries, are actually really more of like a dark sort of violet color. So a lot of plants, a lot of things like that are not able to reflect back that blue to you because they're absorbing too much of it. Okay, and that is, I believe, it for photosynthesis.